Hi, my name is Stephanie Robertson. I'm an assistant professor and librarian at BYU Hawaii, and this is my Open Ed 2023 presentation entitled Reimagining English and the Open Pedagogical Process for an Internationally Diverse Audience. So I have been teaching English at BYU Hawaii since 2009, and since January 2022, I've been full-time as a librarian assistant professor. Here at BYU Hawaii, our librarians are faculty, so we teach a class in one of the programs every single semester, and I usually teach English 101, which is great. I've been able to continue to teach the English class that I've been teaching some form of since 2009. So with this idea in mind, I've seen a lot of different resources for English classes come and go over the years, and now I have an added lens as a librarian and someone who's very passionate and interested about OER to add to the experience of what I hope my students will encounter in my class and the resources I try to make available to them. So let's talk briefly about BYU Hawaii, just so you understand our student population a little bit better as I talk more about the projects I've been able to work on. So BYU Hawaii is an undergraduate university on the island of Oahu with an enrollment of approximately 3,200 students who represent over 70 different countries and cultures from around the Pacific Rim and US mainland and other parts of the world. Extremely diverse little university on a small island in the middle of the Pacific. And a lot of our students, I would say the majority of them, are L2 learners, which means that English is not only their first language, but it may not even be their second, third, or fourth language. And so with this comes a lot of nerves when the time comes for them to be in English 101. And on top of that, we have students from, the continental US that maybe, have developed some fears surrounding English 101 and insecurities from years of, being told that they maybe didn't have skills or maybe they never found a passion for the subject as well. And so as an English teacher for quite a while now, I've taken it upon myself to really try to win them over and help them see that they can love English class. They can find something they enjoy reading. They can learn simple tips and tricks to write well. And it's been really fun and gratifying to see the results. But I want to talk briefly before I talk about the pedagogical projects when it comes to open pedagogy that I've been able to work on in my classroom with my relationship to open educational resources and open access in general. So here's a picture and a screenshot of an American Libraries article that was written about a presentation that I did at ALA's annual conference this summer in Chicago. So the title of my presentation was "It's Not Either Or: How to Include Open Access Materials to Transform Curriculum in Collections." And then I was surprised and a little embarrassed, just kidding, honored to find out that my presentation at ALA was written about in American Libraries. And the title of that article was "Blending Open Access and Traditionally Published Materials. A Community of Practice Can Help Librarians and Faculty Make Choices That Are Right for Them." And anyway, it was a nice article. And the idea being, covering this idea that I am not a practitioner that thinks that only OER needs to exist in a library or on a college campus, or in this case, as I'm talking about today, even in an English classroom. I think that we can blend, it doesn't have to be either or, we can blend traditional publishing with open access materials. Now, obviously, as someone who's presenting has been very active at Open Ed for a few years here, I tend to lean more towards OER, but I don't feel that, like most of us, that, it's the only way to go. I think that we should use it whenever possible, but that there's great merit for both. So I just kind of wanted to set a little groundwork there with that perspective and that positionality. And so I take this idea into my English 101 class. So here's just a brief history of my curriculum. I'm just going to run through it quickly. This won't take long. When I first started teaching in 2009, I just kind of copied what I had learned from my professors. I wasn't too far out of being an undergraduate student. I was doing it as a type of internship. And so I just used those big, fat English anthologies that a lot of people see in English 101 classes or English 100 classes, whatever the, first level, first year writing classes. And those were fine. I could find some good readings in there. I could find some good chapters about the types of writing I wanted my students to do and the literary terms I wanted them to learn. And it was kind of a one-stop shop, and I didn't really know any different. And so it was just what I did. And then, being that my students do come from this very diverse background, many of them being first-generation college students or coming from, socioeconomic backgrounds that don't lend itself well to spending a ton of money on textbooks, I really tried to consider that, as the years went by, I ended up staying on as adjunct faculty, eventually going to graduate school for English and composition and rhetoric specifically, and then getting another master's degree in library science, and kind of evolving all along the way. Our students, most of them work for the Polynesian Cultural Center, which pays for their housing and tuition and food, with a little bit left over. And I didn't want them to spend their little bit they had left over on textbooks necessarily. And as we know, that the literature shows that, using free or reduced cost resources helps improve retention and graduation rates. And even in some cases, it's been shown to keep the same or to improve in grades. This was something that before I even knew what open access or OER was, I felt intuitively that I wanted to help my students out. And so I turned away from having them buy a $75 book or even a $40 book and just started to try to find things online for them to use. Before I went to library school, I will admit I didn't think much of copyright. I had seen some of my professors, even in grad school, maybe, scanning things and making them available or finding links on the internet. And so I think that's something in academia that people have come to terms a little bit more with over the last few years, even, of making sure that things that you have correct copyright and permissions to use things and licensing and stuff. But I would just think, I can find this short story for free. So why would I make them buy a big textbook when I can find poems from here? I can scan this short story, or I can find a link to that short story. And then as I started to do this, I started to develop I remember in grad school, I was learning about agency and students choosing some of their readings. And I saw my students really enjoy that as I let them do that more and more, but still without giving too much thought to copyright. I just knew that I was saving them money, and that was what was important to me. And then as I got into graduate school for library science and found out more about copyright and even more about open access and open educational resources, and really thought, the spirit of this is what has been driving my philosophy as an educator for a while now. And now I can put more research and literature behind the things that I had been intuitively trying to do. So with that, I've, was able to find things, obviously, that were within copyright, things through our library, things that I would just teach to them for my own research and understanding. But still, I wanted to challenge myself. About a year ago, I was able to be a part of a group that wrote the definition of open pedagogy for an encyclopedia for EdTech books. I think the encyclopedia is called EdTechnia. And so through thinking with that group through more about open pedagogy and the implications of it, I got really excited to try my hand at it. So I decided that we would write our own basic literature textbook, and I wanted to use EdTech books. It's a great, resource for those who want to publish OER materials. And so I created Robertson Publishing House for me and my students. And here's what I thought would happen. I thought that we would, look up some things around the internet about the genre of essays, the genres of short fiction, the genre of poetry, and the genre of dramatic works like plays, because those are the things that at BYU Hawaii we teach. That's the genres we generally teach in our English 101 class. And I thought I'd have my students write about it and provide examples, put in some images. I teach them a little bit about Creative Commons and OER so they'd understand philosophically why we're doing these things. I thought that they would, we'd kind of wrap it up within a midterm experience over several, handful of weeks, 4 weeks or so. They'd work in teams and we'd get it published and it would be good to go. And then I could share it out for the next class the next semester. Here's what actually happened. So in an English 101 class, particularly, even though we learned quite a bit about the genres and about writing, it took them a little bit to write their own textbook chapters. I put them into groups of four groups, one for each of the genres that I mentioned. And I had them work together to provide links to add. I've taken a lot of digital humanities classes when I was in both graduate programs. And so I had learned about, the hyperlinks within digital books and how they can add layers of meaning. I talked to my students about this. I thought that they would be able to find things on Pexels or through Creative Commons images, or take their own images that they could include in the textbook that would be representative of our international campus. I had a lot of assumptions about how it would roll out, and then I thought I'd just kind of slap it into the ed tech book and be good to go. And even though I knew there would be some bumps along the way, much like the writing process not being a linear process for most of us, for those of us who have published it, that not everyone starts with a research question, does a little project, has a hypothesis or a thesis, writes the outline, writes the intro, writes the body, writes the conclusion, does the works cited, and goes on their merry way. Sometimes you start with something kind of in the middle and you circle back and you create an outline, and then you work on like one section of it because you've got research on that, and then you adjust and maybe you make a new outline, maybe you change your thesis entirely. The process is not linear. And that's the same for an open pedagogical process. So if you've made it this far in the video and you've done open pedagogy projects in your class before, you're probably saying, yeah, obviously. But if you've never done this before and you're curious, just know that in a bit here, I'll share 4 tips that can help you get started, things that might help you, that I could basically call, don't do it like me, or here's what I've learned. So what actually happened is we had 4 pretty good chapters, for this book, but we didn't have time. We needed to move on past the midterm. And I thought, well, maybe later in the semester, we'll have time to work on actually putting it into the ed tech book format together as a class. And that didn't necessarily end up being the case because I didn't allot enough time for it in my curriculum. And so I said to my class, okay, don't worry about it. Next semester, maybe with my next group of students, I'll go ahead and have them, finish the job for their midterm and make sure that everything here is something that they think is indicative of a global audience as well. And so as always with open pedagogy, you should never mandate that they have their name on the project when you go to actually publish it for others to use and remix and reuse and revise and all the good R's that we love. And so I said, please reach out to me. I gave them an opportunity in our Canvas course to reach out if they did not want their name on the finished product as a co-author along with me, because I thought, oh, I'm going to have to do some work on this, so I'll be the main author. I was like, but maybe not. Maybe I'll just be a name in there with them, and I'll just, but the next semester when I went to work on this with my students, which would be last semester, I thought, all right, we're going to publish this. But as we went to look into the chapters, we saw a lot of inconsistency of format. We saw a lot of inconsistency of what was provided. I would generally like each chapter to follow a similar, or if not the same format, and to have the same deliverables and the same amount of research that went into it, the same amount of examples, or similar, right? So the work of last semester were for those students to be able to look at what the students had done previously, make a copy of those chapters, improve upon it, and provide maybe some more examples because we didn't have a lot of concrete examples. And then when I got to the end of the semester and I thought, okay, I'm just going to need to publish this myself. I'll make all of them co-authors. I'll work on this. I'll be the author. Um, you know, research and other projects took over here in the library, and life happened. And so I didn't get to publishing it. So this semester I had to ask myself, do I want to have another round of this with my current students? And so I decided to get an IRB to maybe interview students from the other semesters. I ideally wanted to maybe have a little bit of that to share with you folks today, or in a future publication. And you know, IRB process takes a while, so so it'll have to be in a future publication. But I think that that will be really helpful too, because as this semester has unfolded, I thought, okay, let's have these students. What I still noticed was lacking was the global perspective. So this semester, my students are trying to give more global examples, and they will be, I'll probably put them in as editors. They're not doing a tremendous amount of writing. Now they're editing. And so what I'm learning is when you are doing these open pedagogical projects with your students, as I'm still relatively new, even though it's been over a year later, you really need to be realistic about your what level your students are at and their deliverable, your timeline. Really, you know, design it the way you would design good curriculum. And so let's talk about more about those tips that I hope will help those of you who are embarking on your own journey with open pedagogy. So first of all, here is some education that I give them in the Canvas course. So I just took some screenshots. And so I give them some information about open educational resources, including this What is Creative Commons slide deck that I created when I was working towards certification with Creative Commons. And so they go through this informational slide deck. They do a little foundational knowledge check with a quiz to make sure they understand what is Creative Commons and why Creative Commons, right? Why OER. And then the Robertson Publishing House, you know, tab up here on the top. So this is the slide deck right here. If you want to look it up, there's information. But Robertson Publishing House is where I assign the midterm. I say, welcome, you're all part of a publishing house. So this is my attempt originally to really frame the project for them, make them feel, you know, because with open pedagogy, what's so exciting about it is that it makes learning relevant to our students, right? That they'll have a finished textbook eventually from their efforts in their midterm, instead of just taking a midterm test about short fiction, essays, and poetry and plays. Instead of, you know, rattling off some facts, cramming the night before the test, taking the test, and then promptly forgetting that information, they are creating a textbook that not only will other students be able to benefit from at BYU Hawaii or wherever globally it will be used, but they can also have it as a line item on their CV or resumes for future grad school use or employment. We also had a student here who was from the Philippines, and when they graduated, they taught at a high school in the Philippines. And I remember them arriving and letting the English program know here at BYU Hawaii that they didn't have a single book for their students. So we had our English student club organization do a big book drive for them. And I kept thinking, oh, wow, wouldn't it have been amazing if that student had the opportunity to create their own textbook as their senior project instead of writing, you know, there's nothing wrong with writing a senior thesis, you know, that is about literature or writing or anything like that that they're interested in. That still has tremendous value, but something that maybe could have lived on beyond that senior project could have been using, you know, then he could have translated it into Tagalog, and through the Creative Commons licensing, we know we can do translations and shared globally, not just for him, but other teachers in the Philippines that might have the same experience. So I was kind of inspired by that and using that example and sharing that example when I frame it for my students in Canvas to tell them about the project. Then I show them an example of an ed tech book. I show them an example of an English literature book, in fact, by Aldrich and Sovak from 2022. Not to copy because it doesn't have the same purposes and relevance for our international audience per se. It's like very good, actually. It's fantastic. But I just thought this will be something that will be written by international students for international students. So for them, it might have even more relevance than any other book written by anyone else, even though Aldrich and Sovak are wonderful and it's a great publication. And then more about OER resources from some of the things that we've all seen from, OpenStax or Pressbooks or EdTech or Lumen or any of the places that any of us get our OER resources. I just had a bit of a kind of like a LibGuide almost with those for them. So that they could find more for other classes or for their future careers or just to see more examples. Here's how far I've gotten in ed tech. English literature basics. It doesn't even have an image. I haven't even done the publishing checklist. It literally just has my name, the title, and if you scroll down, it will say 2023 publishing, but there's nothing else on there right now. So here are some lessons learned. If you plan to publish in one semester, don't plan on much else. So what type of project are you doing? If you're doing like a whole book, like I'm doing with my students, don't plan to finish it in one semester. You will confuse them and yourself, or maybe not, maybe confuse isn't the right word, but maybe frustrate because it's just too much to do in one semester. Don't feel bad if, like me, you need to spread it out over time. And I hope this will actually help you plan better for yours by saying, okay, maybe the first semester, this group of students will write this section or we'll do this aspect of it. So really plan for it to take longer than you think. Because if you're publishing it for the sharing in the wider world, you want it to be quality. My second of 4 tips is get organized first. Have your learning goals, your activities, your assessment, just like we do in instructional design, right? If you have your goal, okay, my goal is that I want them to demonstrate that they understand these 4 genres enough to write a chapter in a group about it for publication. Then I need to set them up accordingly with the activities that I do to accomplish that. And then how do we assess it? How do we know we accomplished our goals? Third, identify your platform of choice. I like ed tech books, but I know many others use Pressbooks and other like platforms that are wonderful. So find the one that you feel compatible with. I do like ed tech books. And last, keep your project student-centered. I could have really, just white knuckled my way through that first semester and just were plowing through, but I noticed that they were struggling a little bit in the writing, and I wanted it to keep at the center of the project my learning goal, which was that they were demonstrating their understanding of the genres, that they were able to create a professional product. And so that's why I feel okay with not being as far with what I want to share with you today and what I'd want to share with the world. Like ideally, I would have a link to the book right now to share to you as I had hoped, but I'm keeping it student-centered because that's what open pedagogy is all about. So moving forward, I think that I'm going to be wrapping up this semester with the global examples, and then I'm going to have my next set of students evaluate it all, and then I will publish it on my own. So go ahead and reach out to me with your email if you want a link to this book when it's eventually published. Don't be surprised if it's not available as soon as I would like, because again, I'm keeping it student-centered to hopefully not only be relevant to my very diverse student population here at BYU Hawaii, but to share globally. And I think it's a beautiful thing to just take a little bit longer with my L2 learners to do this, because what better way to have a well-informed global English textbook than with people from those regions who would benefit from it most. So thank you for your participation and your watching this today. Reach out to me if you have any questions, and let's collaborate. And thank you for your time. Aloha.